Hello, Dr. Ashwin Mehta. Welcome to the podcast,
Thank you for having me.
or welcome back to the podcast, I might say, as part of our series. Thanks for joining with us again today. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the role of data and personalization with AI. And I thought maybe a good starting point, Ashwin, might be a level setting of AI, in your perspective of how we have, the three different core components of learning with content platform and data. And so if you could, maybe can you kind of set the stage for us on what makes data such an important component of AI, and then we can kind of dig into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll set the stage with two things, not just one thing, right?
Okay.
The, as usual, let's go off piste
Yeah,
immediately.
above and beyond. Yeah, we 2 minutes in and we're already somewhere else.
So the reason I say that is it's quite a common question to be thinking about data and AI. What's the relationship, and why should we be thinking about these two things? But the other thing that you mentioned in the intro that you just gave was personalization. And I'd like to start the discussion by tweaking a little bit what that point actually means. What does
Yeah.
that word mean? Because it's something that we have talked about for quite a while. In learning, we talk about it, of course, in marketing as well. The idea of personalizing things, personalizing messaging, personalizing content, personalizing whatever it is that somebody sees in a user interface. And I don't think I'm struggling to think of if we've ever actually achieved this or if I've ever seen this in the learning space. And the reason it's so difficult is because personalizing means to the individual, not to the role, not to the geography, not to the country, not to a particular business unit, actually to the person. So I want to state that up front that
Yeah,
personalization should be that.
that is an interesting wrinkle because personalization has, I think, increasingly gotten harder to do. It's, like I think what is like the Shrek principle that the first Shrek took like whatever 20 hours just to produce. Although, and then the Shrek 2, although the technology enabled it to be produced 100 times faster, they also made it 100 times more complex because the tools to make Shrek were even better. And so so personalization, I think back to, I mean, I even remember when the first iPhone came out, part of that was personalization. They're like, hey, personalize your experience and this, that, and the other. And it was just like you can download the apps that you want. And then in personalization, you mentioned in marketing, there's so many different tiers. We were talking just before this call about how account-based marketing, you almost throw your hands up saying the best personalization that we can do is deliver marketing to somebody in a company. I know this person's at this company, so therefore they're relevant. Or I know they're in this industry. So personalization is happening at an industry level or at a job level. So good context to say, really what we're after here is that individual. I am personalizing to this individual at that layer of depth. And because I think now we have that ability to do so versus, with, oh my gosh, Degreed, when they came out, a big factor and thing they were pushing was, well, we can personalize the content experience for your people. And you peeked under the hood and you're like, well, what does it mean? It's like, well, if they're in sales, we're going to give them sales content.
Mhm.
And like,
So
yeah,
that's role based, right?
that's role based. Yeah. So,
Mm.
anyways, it's a very good context setting.
Sure, and the reason for talking about personalization, because effectively what the question was what's the role of data with AI,
Yeah.
and the role of data with tech, magic, whatever terminology you want to use, the role of data to do something with
Hmm.
some kind of magical technology or whatever widget we're going to use. The role of data is really about understanding your customer, understanding your
Hmm.
learner, understanding your employee, understanding the business. So when we are targeting an intervention that's a technology intervention against some kind of problem, which, in the last session we mentioned articulating your problem is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The more you know about the problem, the more that you know about the person that you're trying to reach with messaging, then the more you can tailor your messaging. So it's a very simple thread, and I haven't even mentioned AI in that thread, right? So this is the simplicity of it. What do we know about our people? And if we know a lot about our people, we can start to leverage that data to customize the message. And if we customize the message, then maybe the message lands more effectively. So that's the kind of narrative structure of this. And the use of data in AI is a slightly separate discussion because everything we know about artificial intelligence is that we use this is going to be the simplest explanation in the world, but bear with me, right? We use computers on data to recognize patterns,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And with generative AI, we use computers, data, patterns to generate something that looks like the pattern.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So if that's what we're doing, we can already see in that tiny, tiny explanation that there's a lot of data required because we need data to make computers work, right? Very, very simple stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now we need data to be able to train our models. When we use models, we're also generating data. When people interact with models, call and response, that interaction itself generates data.
Mm-hmm.
So now we potentially have a much richer data picture than when we just train a model.
Yes.
And now we potentially have something, some data around behavior. Now, let's go back to the original explanation. You know, we use things to that are grounded in data. So things being activities or technology or whatever it is, grounded in data to hopefully land a message more effectively. The data that we have on people's behavior, if we can analyze that, should help us to land the message more effectively because we know how somebody behaves. Now, this is a very nebulous concept that we're talking about. It's not grounded in reality. So let's bring it into reality
Mm.
for a second, right? Now, last time we spoke about content, infrastructure, architecture, and data. In the content space, people people who are making content, developers, etc., you put it on a platform and it maybe it lives in a pathway. That gives us several levels of abstraction to think about when we think about personalization. But it requires us to know what people want, what people do, how people behave. And this is a human computer interaction kind of question. So if we abstract the levels for a second, right, we have content objects, media objects
Mm-hmm.
that sit in content structures, so course structures or module structures that sit on platforms in pathway structures. And those pathway structures might sit in clusters, so plans or groups or something like
Mm.
that. Simple level of abstraction of what learning uses as a kind of taxonomy.
Yeah.
Now, if we apply the problem of personalization and data to both of these, to all of these levels, what we have is a potential future where we say we can personalize content objects at the bottom. So that's the video that I see is different to the video you see. It's in my language. It's got somebody that looks like me telling me things in a kind of way that relates to me,
Right.
resonates with my behavior. So content objects that sit in a content structure. So the narrative from A to B that goes through various objects could be different for me compared to what you see. That could be based on data. I'll talk
Yep.
about what that's based on in a second. Then the series of courses that I actually go through, next level up, in a pathway, the sequence of events, that could also differ based on my preferences and the things that I know. And then clustering that, we have things that are probably start to become a little bit generic now because we might be
Right.
talking about role-based
Like
structures there.
skills or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we
So
have levels
yeah.
of abstraction.
Yeah. So and it's kind of the way that I've always wanted to think of it and you mentioned kind of the content example. And I think in people's minds, and one of the things we can talk about, maybe later, is kind of which of those three tiers is it hardest to kind of leverage the data to operationalize. But I don't know if you saw the movie Her. I believe it was Joaquin Phoenix, and then Scarlett Johansson played the AI girlfriend of Joaquin Phoenix, and it's really interesting because it essentially is hyper personalization, right? Just like you mentioned, the video that the person that he is listening to, Scarlett Johansson in this case, her voice is unique to him, and it happens to be female because that is what he is interested in. But the same exact application who he fell in love with was also a male falling in love with women throughout other avenues of it. So it was like a real life application of this move of what you're talking about, of content at a personalization scale, albeit at a much more blown out. But the interesting component is that is really what we're talking about, and the ability to get there is not so science fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't seen the movie, but I did read about the OpenAI voice assistant when they first brought that out, that it sounded apparently like Scarlett Johansson in this film, and that resulted in some legal action from Scarlett Johansson, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it did. Yeah.
So I mean, that's another interesting kind of worms that we could talk about at some point. Right. But absolutely. So when we're talking about, this is traditional L&D paradigm where we're talking about content objects, content structures, pathways, etc. If we move to the other end and we have effectively RAG agents or agents that are grounded in some kind of documentation that you give it, that's also data, by the way. But that level of personalization is almost innate in the thing that we're using. So it follows a very different kind of pathway to get to personalization. So broad strokes, we have that kind of taxonomy to play with. And the reason it's important to understand that kind of taxonomy is it gives us some thoughts around how we might personalize at each of these levels, but also what kinds of data we might need at each of these levels. But it's still not necessarily an AI play. It's still a traditional L&D content platform play, right?
Yeah.
So if we tease that out for a second, now, and let's just talk it out because that's probably going to be fun, right? So if we, the nebulous we, developers, want to make a video, the video is probably, let's call it sales, learning, marketing, something, some topic. We want to make a video that's going to be personalized for you and personalized for me, but the topic is broadly the same. And let's call it a 1-minute video. What kinds of things might we need to know about you and about me that would shift what the video looks like, what it says, how it sounds?
Yeah. So sales, first thing you'd probably want to know, what's the difference between me and you from a knowledge perspective? Have you been in this industry for 10 years and I just got started last year? So what is my base level knowledge? Probably where is my performance as well? Am I already a peak performer in this topic and I'm just looking to get a little bit better? Or is this an area where I've struggled in the past and I'm needing a little bit of help? So there's my seniority, my job performance. I think my obviously like just gender roles, I think play effect into it. Age, just not just seniority, but age. Millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, Boomer, whatever it is. Locale is huge, right? Obviously, you're in Great Britain. I'm in the United States. We have a completely different. I mean, even in the United States, right? You have something you're going to deliver to somebody in Seattle. It's a lot different than maybe what that person in New York wants to hear or wants to see. So just like very high level, those are just a couple that come to mind. And then my interest, I guess. And then on top of that, there's like the interest, right? Like, so for me, giving me a football analogy. No, there we go. Football. I mean, American football analogy versus, football analogy. But sports analogies, things like that, would play really well with me.
Yeah. So interest definitely, of course, and also ethnicity is a thing as well,
Yep.
right? Um, so we have all of these things that effectively give us a clue as to what how we might want to tailor differences. Now, the point that you made about what you know, I'll
Hmm.
just throw a challenge back to that. What you know, is that going to dictate how we change the video, or is that going to be a next level of abstraction? It's going to change the sequence or the course structure for you rather than the course structure for me. What do you think?
I think it would be both. I mean, I think actually probably the abstraction, the next level up, maybe would even dictate that I wouldn't see this video. And if we were that different apart
Yeah,
from each other, it may be
yeah, yeah.
even that I wouldn't see that video.
Absolutely. And to some degree, it's semantics. We're just
Yeah,
talking it out, right?
exactly. Yeah.
But it gives you a clue as to what kinds of data do we need to know about the person. Now, the kind of language that I use versus the kind of language that you use, given that you are in the US, given
Hmm.
your background, given my background, we can to some degree tease that out. We can understand that. We can tailor it. We can
Absolutely.
also think about sentiment. Yeah,
Hmm.
and uh, you
True.
know, uh, am I a particularly negative person and I want to scrutinize the details, and you particularly positive person and you want to see
Uh,
the roses and the sunshine, right? So all of these kinds of things we can start to tease out, providing that we have the data. If we
hmm.
don't know, then there's nothing we can do about it. So, in a roundabout way, that takes us to the point. And the point is data important if we're going to try and do personalization? So, this kind of illustrates that point a little bit. If we go up in terms of abstraction to a completely different level, and we're thinking about skills or pathways and things like that. Now, a pathway in a platform typically is the chain of content that comes from different places that let's let's say it isn't particularly personalized. So I might go through a series of videos and the series itself might be different to the series that you go through.
Yep.
Although the videos themselves, if somebody else was to see them, it would be the
Yep.
same media. Now, why do we, question back to you, why do we have pathways?
I think it's because not everybody learns at the same way or at the same speed, nor does everybody have the same starting point in that journey.
Yeah.
And trying to force everybody through that same journey, at some point, it becomes a one size fits none, where it was designed to be a one size fits all.
Yeah, it's the filling in the gaps, right?
Yep.
Um, and that requires us to know what the gaps are, right? So
Yep.
this is the point of, how much assessment do we do? How much do we understand about people's skills? How much do we understand about their proficiency in terms
Hmm.
of how comfortable they are exercising those skills? And then we get to this point where we understand what somebody does and doesn't know, and that leads us eventually to the purpose. I mentioned purpose earlier. The purpose of all of this stuff is to provide people with adequate support, right? It's to adapt our learning and teaching strategies such that people have the right level of knowledge that they can exercise
Hmm.
to fulfill the requirements of their roles, right? If we're doing it that way and we're taking the responsible approach to support everybody adequately, it helps to know what people don't know. It
Hmm.
helps to know where the gaps are, and it helps to be able to articulate that in data, because then we can action it. So again, another roundabout way of saying data is important.
Yeah, I was just chatting internally with a consultant about skills, and I was at HR Tech, and so a lot of the conversation in the HR tools now is focused on kind of skills as they're moving, I would say, like down the funnel, right? HR is
Mhm.
traditionally the recruitment, kind of onboarding, things like that. But then I think they're starting to say, okay, well, what do we do once this person's in the door? So that line between HR and learning is kind of merging. And, I was saying so much of um, so much of what we know about a person is revolved around data. And the way that it used to be, if we ever tried to do this type of grouping that we talked about, right? Of like, how do we really know what Nolan knows? Or what Nolan knows actually might be a little bit easier, but how well do I know what 10,000 employees know in my company? And how do I do it at a systematic way? Well, this was a multi-year process, a 3-year process to
Mm.
try to actually get this information. Um, and so, but today, that timeline between what do my people know and how can I connect that and start grouping people has shrunken so quickly with AI
Mm.
that it enables that feedback cycle to go much faster, which is really important because skills are ever changing, and what we want them to do, again, the data is all the input to whatever the output we're trying to accomplish, because the data doesn't give you anything except for it doesn't do anything for you. You have to go forth and prosper, right? But it's not going to
Mm.
solve the problem. It's there to tell you the problem and for you to do something about it. And so I really think, for those that are listening to this, if you're wondering, well, what's really changed? Yes, this all of this could have been said, 50 years ago as well. But the difference is that now our access to this data and our ability to interpret that data is so much faster that it took what used to be years of cycles into months, days, weeks of cycles.
So the volume of data is also different, right? Now,
Absolutely.
with we have lots and lots of data available to
Yeah.
us, but my reflection on some of the technological changes that we've had over the last, let's say, the last year, right?
Yeah.
Particularly in the agent space. So when we start to talk about things like the co-pilots and the
Hmm.
OpenAI agents of this world, we start to be thinking about, well, what we're generating as people are typing or speaking into an agent,
Hmm.
we are generating a effectively a very sophisticated bank of questions that people have.
Absolutely.
And when we get responses and we get then responses to responses, we're starting to generate a very sophisticated picture of how people question, how people behave, what people know, what people don't know. Now, my reflection is, this is fairly standard stuff, but my reflection on all of that is we are entering a world where we are building increasingly sophisticated data collection tools.
Yeah.
If we are building those tools, which I think we are, then our capabilities to interrogate and scrutinize increasingly sophisticated data need to match. And if they match, then our ability to get insight also changes. So that's a thread that I haven't yet seen mobilize because that's kind of emerging. We're still in the space where we're focusing on the tools. What can the tools do?
Hmm.
And we're not yet in a space where we're focusing on, we have large amounts of transcript data that is telling us very detailed things about behavior and about sentiment and about themes and about how people discuss and how discourse happens with people. So with that massive volume of data, and it will be different from organization to organization, from role to role, from person to person, I think we will enter the next year with maybe some curiosity, maybe some abilities to start to scrutinize transcript data in a way that's very different. And then hopefully that gives us very different behavioral uh, personalization capabilities.
Yeah, and a lot of, the takeaway, a big takeaway I'm getting from what you're saying is, yeah, we've always had data, but we all know, or we've seen the chart millions of times about how much data, the exponential growth of data points
Yeah.
that we have, and that is just getting higher. And I think part of the, I don't know if it's a paradox, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's almost like when you start creating a solution, if you're looking to actionalize it and start personalizing, right? We want to start personalizing. I almost feel like you ought to just put like draw a line in the sand and say, okay, like at this point, these are the data sources that we have. Now we know that we're going to be getting better and we know that we're going to get more, but we almost have to say, this is it. Because the amount of data, not this is the only data, but these are the sources and this is how we're capturing it and this is how we're ensuring this data is clean. Because if you're trying, I think the idea of having all of the data needed to be personalized and perfecting that data is really hard and can be kind of a never ending journey. Which brings me to a question I wanted to ask is when it comes to data and the role of personalization, we've always heard garbage in, garbage out.
Mhm.
Now with so much garbage, so much data coming in, what do you really feel when we're talking about personalization? How do we find that balance between getting lots of data versus ensuring that data is relevant and accurate?
It's an interesting question, and I don't think I'm not sure I agree with the premise, right? Getting lots of
Okay.
data.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I say I'm not sure I agree with the premise is that let's pivot to
Yeah.
we're grounding our conversation in learning and development.
Yeah.
In the learning and development space, are we still in the space of we are collecting time-stamped SCORM data, or are we in the space, and this is industry trend, right?
Right.
Or are we in the space where we have deep and granular data on operational metrics, on behaviors, on intervention success, on what people do and do not know, on repeat interventions, and that then forms a picture of effectively skills and knowledge gaps,
Right.
which we can address. Because it seems from what you said, we have all of this great data, and I'm just challenging back. Actually, this is the relevant data. Do we have it?
No. No, I mean, well, I should say that data absolutely exists. It
Yeah.
absolutely does. Whether whether I'm delivering sales training to Joe, I know whether Joe's a good salesman, or I can figure it out. I should say I don't know. That
Mm.
data exists, and that data exists with high accuracy. Now, from what I've seen, and we touched about this a little bit in the last session. Now, my ability to be able to get to that data and interpret that data and connect that back to an intervention that is going to have an impact on that data,
Yeah.
I don't think we're quite there yet. But the data is there. Now, my ability to execute again, find, use, interpret, I think we still have a gap.
So I agree with you from a sales perspective. Now, the reason I think sales is a special case is most businesses that have sales functions will tend to measure their sales functions reasonably well
Right.
because it's the closest thing to revenue, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everything else, I think it varies from role to role, profession to profession, as to um how well data is captured on the things that matter, right?
So what would you let's take a look. What's the hardest one? Like so sales is the easiest. I would absolutely agree. What would be one of the harder ones we're talking about here?
So I think if we were to go from sales through things like manufacturing through to things that are more conceptual, like foundational research and development, if we take that as a vertical, I think we get
Hmm.
it's easy up here and it's quite difficult
Hmm.
down here.
Hmm.
And then if we go across, we have support services. So we have things like IT, where you would
Yeah.
say, the number of tickets that we have and the resolution of those tickets is probably we have a lot of data on that.
Yeah.
We might go through things like health and safety, where we say, well, we know about accidents, we know a little bit about near misses, but there are other nebulous things that we don't fully know about, human factors, for example. Um, so I don't think it's as mature in every aspect of every business. I think that's the challenge I'm making.
Hmm. I don't know. I see. The reason I asked that is um I agree that the level of data that we have is probably not as tangible or believable as
Hmm.
sales. I do, but I just think back, this was 15 years ago. Um, a mom and pop meat processing facility in Utah.
Yep.
We built software for them where they could track a cow. Um, actually, any supermarket that would call and could say, "Hey, where did this particular package of meat came from?" They could trade. They could tell you everybody who touched that, where that cow came from, who
Yeah.
sold that cow, what that cow ate, all attached to a specific thing. And they so like that was just at a tracking of a particular piece of meat. But then at
Mhm.
the local level, they could see, okay, how much meat can Joe pack a day, an hour, a minute, what type. And so and this again, this is a very small operation, 10 million bucks at the most. And I think I'm even thinking, well, what about a lot of the mid manager roles, right? It's really hard to track,
Yeah.
I think, at a middle level manager. But then I think, but if I
You're right.
had
Yeah.
to, but if I had to, right? If I had to,
Mm.
what could I look at? Um, could I look at a function of the team, right? What does that
Mm.
team produce back to me? And I guess what my challenge would be, Ashwin, is if you can't measure somebody's performance, then how the hell are you actually measuring their performance? Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? What are
So
we doing here? I guess is the question.
qualitatively,
Yeah,
qualitatively versus quantitatively. So
exactly.
with knowledge work, it's way more difficult to
Yeah,
track these things. With some of the things you're mentioning,
yeah,
so in pharmaceutical supply chain, right, tracking
yeah.
active pharmaceutical ingredients
Oh,
from wherever they
yeah,
come around the world
yeah,
is akin to what you're saying
yeah,
with the food safety piece.
yeah,
And I did see a piece on, I don't know what the coffee chain was, Costa, Starbucks, something
yeah. Mm,
like that, but they were able to apply computer vision to CCTV and figure out who was making the most cups of coffee, right?
exactly. Yeah.
So the data, yes, the data is there, but the slight disagreement that I'm posing here is in the world of L&D, not in a world of operations. In the
Right.
world of operations, the data might be there. In the world of L&D, do we have that data when it comes to making an intervention?
No, and no, absolutely not. I think, and oddly enough, I feel like a couple of the stabs I've seen at companies, there was a really cool early day LRS called Saltbox in Seattle. They ended up
Mm,
selling. Um, that was all focused on developing better XAPIs to track to like start getting this one their big use cases with insurance, and they were able to say, insurance agents that took these courses were more
mm.
likely to produce X results. But and I thought for sure, gosh, this market's going to take off like crazy. Who wouldn't want this? But it just never really has. It never really did. So yeah, we don't have access to that data, and I think maybe that's one of the biggest issues that ought to be addressed before we, if we
Yeah,
really want to personalize, because we have to follow the money.
yeah, and I think just to your point, XAPI adoption has not taken off in the way that maybe we expected in
Yeah.
mid 2000s or whenever it
Yeah.
came out, right? So yeah, that kind of data adoption is that database adoption is something that we should probably think about. But yeah, if the data exists, we should use it, right? And it might be as simple as like, are we asking for the right data? That it might
Yeah.
just be as simple as that. But if we don't have the data, then everything subsequent becomes very difficult because we're trying to base our interventions on the data that we don't have.
And so, and I guess maybe that's maybe my uh, maybe the talking point is really when I said, how much data is right, or how accurate is that data is right. If we have data and we're talking about personalization, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, like, well, really, where do I really begin in this ocean of data?
Yeah.
Um, what is really more? Is it more important that I know Nolan likes, sports, and Nolan likes the outdoors, and he's a male, he's Caucasian, you know, um, whatever, you know, I don't know which age bracket I'm in, but millennial or whatever it is. Um,
You
is
don't know if
that
you're a
more?
millennial or a Gen X.
I don't. I never,
Oh
because I
boy.
was on a verge, and like at that point, people weren't really interested in tagging people, you know, at that
Okay.
point, and so at
Hmm.
a certain point, I kind of moved on with my life. Um, but so, is that more important than knowing Nolan is a star performer or not? Is no What areas of Nolan's business is he better at than not?
Right.
Because
So
I understand it's a hard thing because yeah, I could know that Nolan sucks at sale or Nolan, you know, Nolan's a bad leader and all of his people are leaving him. The attrition data is pathetic. So, well, what am I going to do with that? I need to create an intervention to change the outcome. But if that intervention is designed for a 70-year-old black lady out of Australia, it's not going to be brought home to me. Like, I'm not going to interpret that and
yeah.
listen and be able to make an impact. So, really, where do we strike the balance?
So back to my very first point on personalization, right?
Yeah.
It's important to ground ourselves and to say, well, most of what we're talking about only really applies at scale. Because if you need to think about personalization and you only have two people in your team, then you just go and talk to them. But if we've got 100,000 people and we need to,
Yeah. Yeah.
change messaging ever so slightly, then this stuff starts to become more interesting. So important to note the use cases that you've talked about. And what I said earlier about the whole reason for doing this is so we can adapt our support strategies, different interventions for
Mm-hmm,
different use
mm-hmm,
cases.
mm-hmm.
So it's important to figure out what's the minimum sort of amount or type of data that we need. Now, if we're doing an intervention that is, as you mentioned a few times, in the sales space, what do we know about the sales funnel? What do we know about the process of sales? Is a particular person failing to get the first meeting? Are they failing
Mm-hmm.
to at the
Right.
third meeting to close?
Yeah.
Are they getting a lot of withdrawals after they
Mm-hmm.
proposed, right? So the kind of data that you want to be thinking about is what's happening in the operational value chain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why is that important? How can you target your intervention to that? And
Yes. Yes.
then there's another level of data abstraction where you say, well, now that we know which the key messages are and the key things that we want to fix in our value chain, the business problem that we talked about, which people need these interventions? How do you tailor it specifically for them? So we only really have those couple of levels to play with. Now we could talk about adaptive learning and knowledge graphing and all of
Right.
these
Right.
these
Right.
kinds of things.
Yeah.
But that's a level of complexity that is probably over to this side. Just like if
Yeah.
we do this with AI, we need RAG agents, we need to be collecting personal data in a JSON or a text file or something. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be adapting um, our responses based on what we know about the person. So that's level of complexity over here. On a very basic level, what do you know about your value chain? What do you know about your people? Does
Yeah.
that give you any clue as to I'm going to do this for the US market. I'm going to do this for the UK market. I'm going to do this for a slightly different market. But that's using data to change your message, which is what
Mm-hmm.
I said earlier. But I don't want to call that personalization because it's not
Yeah.
for the person, but it still gets the result
Yeah.
that we want.
It's the you know, the three-tier model. Like, what is the skill? You know,
Yeah.
then what is the underlying components of that, and then who is this person who's applying these things? And as you mentioned, I think that's a really great starting point for those people of collecting data at what brings value back to the company in this person's day, or
Mm.
you know, whatever month, year, whatever it is. How is this person bringing value to the organization, or how is this group of people bringing value to this organization? And then understanding what is good, what is bad, what is medium, and then starting to segment users based off of that. And then that gets you to that core. Okay, now I know, as you said, maybe the person is really bad at opening, makes a terrible first impression. So we have this whole group now of learners that make a really bad first impression. And so now we've used data to segment and narrow our problem down. And then the personalization would come if we were able to then say, okay, why does Nolan make such a bad first impression? And how can we deliver a message to him that is relevant to why Nolan makes a bad first impression, or maybe not even why he makes a bad first impression, but what does he need to hear to start making a better first impression?
Yeah, and this takes us down the avenue of diagnostic data, right? So diagnostic assessment even. So when we think about assessment, we think about diagnostics, formative, summative, and all of this stuff. So if we think about diagnostic assessment, and just to take what you've said one level further,
Yep.
if we were to say you're not getting the foot in the door because you're doing X and you should do Y.
Mm-hmm.
It requires us to have data on what X is, what's the thing that you're actually doing.
Yep.
And if you have that level of data, you can pull that in and you can really speak to people and say, dear, let's imagine we build a narrative, right? Dear name field.
Yeah.
You are doing behavior field and you should
Right.
be doing target behavior field. And you
Yeah.
could build that as a sentence on a screen as long as you have the database behind it to insert name, insert behavior, and insert target behavior.
Yeah. So then where does then AI step into the fold? Because a lot of this is just actually data collection, right? And
It
as you
is.
mentioned, none of this is necessarily leveraging AI.
Yeah.
It's things we have access to right now. So
hmm
where does AI then help us either solve within that problem or take it to
Yeah.
that mecca of personalization?
So I think there are a couple of different categories for that, and it's always going to depend on data. Let's just get that caveat out the way first, right? So, category one, we're not going to use AI for anything except just making content. So now, if we wanted to make 100 different content objects instead of just the one, and we wanted to personalize them for the messaging that we know in the
Yep.
behavior and the target behavior field,
Mm-hmm.
we can now do that. We can do it at scale. We can do it quickly.
Yep.
So that's point one. Uh, Point two is we have a lot of data. Let's imagine we've collected fields of data, um, and we're going to need to recognize some patterns in that. We're going to need to recognize some trends. We could throw this all into Excel, eyeball it, try and find, some trends, or we could apply machine learning and get pattern recognition to work for
Yep.
us in a slightly better way. The third area of this would be once we are in the space where we're comfortable with using virtual agents and we're comfortable with using either RAG, agentic RAG, or multi-agent models, we could be thinking about how do we surface the information to the learner that is most effective for them based on their personal data.
Right.
But it requires us to have that personal data effectively as a database somewhere.
Yeah.
So we have
Yeah.
these three sort of options that are easily available. And then we have the fourth option, which is we could go buy something and we could implement something. And in that space, we might be looking at, again, the likes of some kind of adaptive tooling, where we say, well, we want people's interventions, broadly speaking, to be linked to these sources of data. And you would be engaging a vendor to do that. Or you might say we want to really increase our rehearsal capability. So what we need from our rehearsal capability is we're going to do a lot of practice. I'm going to talk into the camera a lot, and I'm going to get some hints and tips around what my behaviors are and how that maps to a data model of my most successful salespeople, for example, if we're talking about sales. And I will get hints as I go, as I'm rehearsing to kind of sharpen my pitch before I then go to do something. So we probably have, what was that? That was five categories of using AI to solve for that problem.
Yeah, the one I think I'm seeing the most in our clients right now, and interested to hear what you're seeing, although I don't know if it's the largest impact. And I think, a couple, 5 year, whoever knows how many years from now, I don't know if it will be prevalent. I think as agents take over, it will become less. Is the let me use AI to create 100 different variations of the same program and deliver it to those
Hmm.
people who I know want to have it. Where in the past I never had that ability to do so, right? I never had the ability to change the avatar from a white American to a Hispanic person who speaks Spanish. I never had that ability, but now I do. Now I just go into Colossian and I click a button to avatar and click another button to
Mm.
change the language, and I did it within 30 seconds. So I'm seeing a lot of the application at that side. Would you say that's what you're seeing as well, or are you seeing? I mean, again, that's what I'm
Mm.
seeing. And the implementation, I think the conversations are more a la like actually like the either the how do I interpret massive amounts of data, or how do I create some of these agents that kind of communicate. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So I'm seeing less in the pre-built content space,
Yeah,
mainly because those aren't really the conversations I tend to get into.
right.
Um, in the pre-built content space, of course, we're looking at I can now scale what I'm making in terms of
Mm-hmm.
content. On the real-time learning and the flow of work side of things, which tends to be more where I have conversations, uh, multimodal real-time generation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not here yet, but there are so many moves towards that. So if we take the different levels of abstraction in that, uh, we are able now to get a text response at the click of a button
Yeah.
on something that we want. We are able to get an audio response now, click of a button,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we are also able to talk, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk and we can actually have up to, potentially Socratic dialogue with some of the agents that are there. Once we get video in that space and one can customize the avatar, so I can say, I always want to talk to somebody that looks like me,
Yeah.
somebody that sounds like me, somebody that has the same kind of dialect and intonation in their voice as I do, maybe somebody who uses the same language as I do. Once we're in that space, and forgive I don't want to be the Salesforce guy in the room, but the Clippy reference is evident in what the CEO of Salesforce, I think, talked about
Yeah.
Microsoft and was talking about Clippy. So the idea of having a constant support in your life, somebody that is able to answer the questions that you want, a virtual agent, not a real person,
Mm-hmm.
that talks to you in a way that you relate to, and potentially with a face that you relate to. So I'm deliberately not using terms like avatar or creation of content,
Yeah.
but surfacing that in real time is a lot more where I'm seeing the conversation around personalization happen. So what do we know about people, and how can we use that to surface something where the message lands and is based on a trigger. So the knowledge worker is asking to find something out
Yeah.
rather than we are pre-building content in the hope that somebody wants to use it. So I'm seeing that as the
Yeah. And
conversation.
and yeah, to clarify, I think that's where the conversations are, right? I feel like conversations, what is it, like precede actions, right? Like, and I
Mm.
think that that's what we talk about. I think, and a lot of us are talking about now because we're seeing the power of that being a sea change to replace the other
Yeah,
conversation. And if you have one, you maybe don't even need the other. And in this case, the other represents an enormous cost investment and the pain in the butt for many people, right? Like to
yeah,
keep that engine
yeah,
churning represents a significant pain in the butt, and albeit some call it a necessary evil. I don't know, but yeah, absolutely. So there, I mean, I feel like there's so many different, we didn't even get to unbox one of the bigger questions that we could probably have an entire podcast on, which is just what is as we want more personalization, we need to know more about a person.
Mhm.
And how much is a company allowed to collect on a person and store on a person and know about a person that's an employee of a company? And what happens when that employee leaves? Do they get to own
Yep.
that person? Do they delete that person? All of that, I think, is really interesting. Here
Yeah.
in the States, we tend to not really care. Like we don't have a GDPR. We just, hey, whatever, take whatever data you want, do whatever you want. I'm sure Europe, I know, has much more. And so I think that will be an interesting wrinkle. We don't
Mm,
really have time to dig into, but as we personalize more, we need to know more about that person
we do.
and
Yeah.
what type of how willing are we to collect the data on our employees, and how willing are employees to allow us to collect the data on them. It's one of those, you check the box and you get a new smartphone or you download a new app or whatever, and it says, do you want to see personalized ads?
Mm.
And many people say no, and others are like, yeah, I mean, hell, if I'm going to see an ad, at least I want it to work. I want it to be for something I might want to buy. So that,
But I think people should be way more aware of like accepting cookies and things than they probably are, right?
well, they claim that Cookie Gate's coming, or Cookie Get In, whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. So we'll see what happens with that going away. But Dr. Ashwin Mehta, as we wrap up here, and we're a little bit over time. I apologize for that. Can we try to summarize this big web that we've just spread out? Is there a way we can
Yes.
put this can of worms back into a can as a good takeaway for this podcast?
Yeah. So the first thing is let's stop talking about personalization and let's start talking about customization.
Yeah.
Very different thing. The second thing is, if we're customizing, what data do we need on the operational value chain and on the person to be able to land the message such that behaviors or skills are generated and are valuable for the person and for the business? That's a very different way than saying, let's personalize to the nth degree everything that we can do. And the third thing is to be aware of the limitations when we are creating lots of content and trying to personalize at different levels of abstraction versus the incoming potential revolution of having virtual agents in the flow of work that are way more able to have personalized messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. At first I thought you said evil and not able. And
Able.
so yeah, I had a little laugh there. Well, thank you so much, Ashwin, for investing time with us in the second part of the series. For those that are not aware, this is a whole series on AI and its application in L&D. Be on the lookout. If this is the first one in the series that you've connected, go back and listen to the others or check the others. They're all on our Spotify channel. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll meet up again soon.